B1, this is the starter code. Before we start off, you notice that this assignment is rather large. So I highly recommend that we create a plan of attack. What are some tasks that we'll need to do in order to accomplish a dice game? So we're doing some planning, and the more specific we can be, the better we're able to then organize and write our code. So computer programming A students, shout out some things we gotta do in order to achieve our dice game. Name some actions, name some things we have to draw. Set up. Draw. We need canvas. Okay, we need to make circles, right? We don't need monkeys just yet. Yeah, random's a good idea. Random numbers for the dice. Variables to store things. Like what? What kind of variables do you think we're gonna have for like any arbitrary dice game? Right, a dice value would be nice. Maybe a sum if you're adding things together. Maybe a score if you're keeping track of that, or some kind of total. Okay, those are going to vary. Maybe you have different players, player 1 versus player 2. So anything you want to keep track of, you're going to create variables for. Probably have to draw the dice before we generate numbers for it. Circles could be the patterns on the dice if you want to go there. Circles for the die dot patterns. Anything else? Or do we have the bare bones requirements for a dice game? Nope. Okay. Go ahead, Liam.
What was the question?
So we're creating the skeleton for a dice game. Are there any more things we'll need to do besides the stuff up here in blue?
Use Boolean operators.
Use, what does that mean?
True or false.
Okay, use Boolean operators. So this specifically is, we have to code up the rules of our game. So that's the hardest part. That's the logic behind our game. Like when, for example, when the sum is greater than like 10, you get a point. English sentences like that have to get translated into code. That's your main challenge after the initial drawing and stuff. So let's get this set up. Create canvas. I'll just do maybe one die and we can check to see if it's greater than 10. To see some other stuff. Canvas, I can spell, 400, 400. Function draw, we always need these two functions. And let's draw maybe a rectangle to begin with now, in position 100, 200, of size 50, 100, 100. Alright, let's see what happens. Save and run. Alright, great. We have a number box. You're welcome to go 3D with this. One student did so before in my previous class, although rolling kind of looked funny. Alright, and then the next thing, why don't we get started with the numbers being shown there, and let's see if we can display some text if it's like greater than 3, and if it's less than 3, we say you lose. Once we have a rectangle, we want to display some text as our number. You're welcome to code up the actual dot patterns, but I don't think I'll have time to do so. Value. And then I need to make it match the rectangle, so that's the upper right hand corner is here, the size is here. Save and run. Ta-da. Okay, it's very small. Let's make it bigger. Text, capital S, size, 50. And I'll run. And that's a lot better, right? And you can play around with it, make it fit nicely. If it's just one number that we'll update it to, it's going to be fine. So Adrian and Claire, are you listening? Do you want this code or not? Like I recorded, that's fine, but you should be listening the first time around. Okay?
We want to know what it looks like.
Liam, be quiet. So here's going to be our die value. Maybe at first we'll start it at 0. We know that's an invalid dice roll. And notice down here in the text function, we can update that to be that variable, die underscore value. Save and run. Cool. So we see the number 0. And now if we update this variable up here to 1, we save and run. We see that it updates to 1. That's great. 1. And we want to go through up to 6. I think this will be maybe your second or third instance of working with the random function. So die value here in your setup. I forget if it's random or random number. JavaScript people, can you help me out? Is it random or just random? Okay. And I think by default you got to be careful because we think maybe 0 to 6 is going to work. Let's see what happens. Save and run. It starts at 2. When set up, it generates a totally new value. Okay. So part of this we want. It does give us a random number each time, but now it is a decimal. We don't necessarily want that. Okay, 4.2, 3.19, 2.9, 1.9, that's good. So you'll see that we are going to use two functions at the same time. We're using the random function. We're also going to round it a little bit so that we just see whole numbers. We don't want any decimal places. Okay? And if you're really picky with this, you'll realize, like, wait a second, Mr. Chen, if you go up to 6, 5.9 and 5.5 get rounded up to 6, 6 is going to occur less frequently. So really, we should go up to like 6.5 or something like that if we wanted even distributions of the numbers. And I think the number 1 also occurs okay, but you probably don't want you don't want 0 to appear, so you'll actually start at 1.5 because of how rounding works. Okay, so now there's an equal probability that the numbers 1 through 6 will be generated, mimicking an actual die. In previous semesters, I didn't point that out, and that's why the game is always rigged for you to lose, because you do something based on 6, and then your code breaks when a 0 pops up. So be careful right there, right? I think on a quiz that you'll have next week, I asked you about the random function. Know how the random function works. Okay. Notice the rounding that occurs there, here. We can tie together some of the stuff we learned from our previous assignments, like using if statements with mouse is pressed to generate a new value each time the mouse is being pressed. Right now, notice I have to press save and run in order to generate a new value, kind of like in your many, many shapes assignment if you went for the 4 out of 4. This is how you will do so. Save and run. So at the beginning, it gives us a random number, 5. If I click, right, it generates a new value, but now you got this weird behavior. If you click and hold, it keeps generating a new value. You may want this because it looks like actually rolling some die. The number cube is spinning around. You don't know where it's going to stop until you release your hand. Yes? There's something interesting about that, right? Something very subtle that I'll highlight later. Is the value here actually 2, or is the value here actually 4? That's something I'm going to bring up later because it could affect how your game logic works. But I'll hint at it now. Other things, like using if statements, that was a part of your lessons. Maybe when your die value is greater than or equal to 3, you're going to display certain text. You say to the user, you win. Okay, regardless of the game you choose to implement, you're probably going to have something like this. We're going to have it be longer so we see the entire words. Okay. And let's see if this thing works. Save and run. Notice at the very beginning, it generates a value. We've got 1, so it doesn't run anything. Now you have this weird sensation, right? I'll play that again. Save and run. At the very beginning, I'll try to tap my mouse just once. Notice I win right off the bat, correct? But now if I generate a value, and I try to do so, that's less than 3, like 2, it still tells me I win. You don't want that, correct? And you're thinking about why the code looks this way. Well, that's because you didn't draw the background. This win actually came from the previous row. So you gotta do so strategically. Like 1 shouldn't have generated anything, neither should have 2. So maybe while you're like not wanting to redraw the entire background, or maybe you do, background of 255. Let's see what happens now. So we just see you win. Great. But now I don't see my value. I click the mouse. Now it just flashes and it appears, right? Like a ghost fading in. And now I still always see I win. What gives? Well, you may want to play around with this logic. Do you want to check it at the very beginning? Do you want to check it after the mouse is pressed? This order, the sequencing, is what makes this this assignment a bit more complicated than you would have thought at first. Let's get it to display properly. If our die value is 3, then we display this. Instead of drawing the background, I just want the text to be either covered up or displayed. Let's have it display there, and else, no winner yet. So that means die value is less than 3. We're going to generate a text box or a white rectangle that's going to hide the previous things. So I'm going to copy this line of code, change text to rectangle, rect, delete the first argument, you win, and now we should see some things cleaned up. Save and run. At the very beginning, we see that 6 was drawn because that's greater than 3. When I click, oops, I went the wrong way. I need to change the stroke too. Stroke is white, 255. Maybe I'll move it over a hair in the X direction so I can see the border of my die. Save and run. Okay, now I see you win. 3 is greater than or equal to 3. And I click the mouse. 6 is greater than or equal to 3. Click the mouse. 4 is greater than or equal to 3. Wait, I made my background disappear. Okay, but now you notice you win displays appropriately. Notice for 1, it's covered up ever so slightly. I think I can improve that a bit more for the X direction. But now my dice box went away. You're like, okay, what happened, Mr. Chan? What happened to the outline? Well, up here, notice how stroke works. Stroke turned to white, and if you want the border to appear again at the top for here, you need to tell it, okay, I want the outline. So this is where I draw my first die. Save and run. So now I have my border. 2 is not less than 3, therefore I don't win. I click, I get 5. That's greater than 3, so I see you win appear. All right, so we have the skeleton of a basic dice game. Okay, greater than, equal to, less than. So that's part of it. So the next lesson, I'm going to build on this. Maybe we'll create a second die. We're going to show you examples of how you implement more complicated logic. Like, how do you code the rule like, oh, the sum must be greater than 6 and it's divisible by 3. Right? Maybe you care about that. Or how do you know you have 2 matches or triplets? Let's say you create 3 dice. Those more complicated dice game rules, I'll try to preview tomorrow. Work on your dice games. This stuff's going to be shared. I'm going to upload this video up to YouTube so you can rewatch it at your own leisure. This is day 1, and tomorrow I'm going to build on this code some more. So if you have questions about this, do ask me in these next 15 or so minutes in class. Computer programming B, it doesn't look like I'm going to lecture that much at you given this time, but we'll see.